Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Roundtable, a digital marketing podcast. My name is Brandon Jones, and I am the producer along with a paid media expert.
Hi, I'm Brian Cosgrove, principal at Braindew, and I've been doing digital analytics work for a number of years. And I'm here to speak today with Ryan.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
All right. So, Ryan, I met you years ago at these digital analytics events in Philadelphia. And I think at the time you were working for a company that does work in a lot of surveys, like exit surveys, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you've come a long way since then. I think that was about a decade or more ago at this point, or close to it. So can you just tell me a little bit about your digital marketing journey, kind of how you got to where you currently are?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I'll start back at college. I'm advertising. I have an advertising degree with a focus in research. The first job out of college was in social media listening, back when the Twitter fire hose was public and Facebook posts were public and things like that. We were just scraping that data and analyzing it and trying to provide real-time brand lift insights, as well as threat monitoring, all sorts of stuff like customer service, like handing it off to customer service representatives. Following that, I really got into web analytics and marketing once I started at a little startup where through those little networking events, I met Brian through my mentor, and there I did a lot of intercept surveys on websites, helping big brands all over the place just learn how to optimize their conversion funnel, understand who's visiting their healthcare and pharma websites. So really ran the gamut between all the different clients I used to work with to help them provide a little color to their web analytics data. From there, I moved into an agency and I started consulting on all things Google Analytics, Google BigQuery, things like that, just to help them set up their analytics, track things properly, all the different interactions of a website. And that's really where a lot of my consulting work stopped. And that's where I moved to client side, particularly like Silicon Valley tech, social media companies, just doing enterprise level website tracking. And since then, I've moved into A/B testing at those companies. So yeah.
Okay. So you've definitely done a lot there. I feel like a lot of our audience now doesn't know what an intercept survey is. So can you kind of explain what kind of survey is an intercept survey?
Yeah, I mean, so everyone's gotten those annoying pop-ups with surveys that said, like, let's say, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you recommend this company? Something commonly known as net promoter scores, which are great for measuring the value of your customers and whether you're going to churn or not. However, when you're surveying people on a website who may not be involved with you yet, the idea was to get a high response survey to tell you what is it that they are to you. Like, if talking about an e-commerce site, am I a prospect? Am I a customer? Am I looking for product information? And then marrying that intent data with behavioral clickstream data, your typical web analytics data. The power there is you can gather the insights of who are they, what are they coming for, with what they actually do on the site. So it answers the typical question of what is the value of web, which is a problem that I've seen my whole career. I've never seen anyone answer it perfectly, and it's a really difficult question to answer. But the solution was a little startup, that's what an intercept survey is.
Okay. No, that's cool. So just so I understand and just that I'm like for our listeners, just that we can explain it to them. Effectively, you're saying that it's not the net promoter score that people are used to seeing. You're not just saying on a scale of 1 to 10, how willing are you to recommend this company? You're talking about something that's very specific. Like they left at a certain part of the site and you're asking them questions to try to figure out, were you looking for something else? Were you trying to buy something and had a problem? Is that the kind of thing you're talking about here?
Well, it's all sorts, right? So we did things like entry surveys. So as soon as you get to the site, we ask you, who are you? What are you looking for? So we can get a
Right.
good representative sample from every single page on your site. Who's coming and what pages are they landing on? Where are they coming from? Paid, organic, uh, direct, any of those. And it helps you kind of know who's coming at what rate and
Mhm.
what share of your, like, for example, at a healthcare site, is it 50% of your visitors that are patients, or is it 50% healthcare providers? Because people will
Right.
build sites for one or the other, and then they realize, oh, that's actually a very different audience than I thought. So that's one type. Another is the exit survey, like you mentioned. Like when they leave the site, how did they how was the experience for them? What were the pain points for them? Why did they leave? Things like that. And then there's like in funnel surveys. So say you have an e-commerce flow, you want
Yeah.
to know why did you like what information on this specific page were you looking for that wasn't here? Like why didn't you go to the next page? So there's all sorts of different strategies you can do to capture that kind of intent data. And the net promoter score stuff that I mentioned earlier is kind of the classical market research approach to market research, right? They give
Yeah.
you a questionnaire that has 100 questions on it, all rank this 1 to 10. How likely are you to recommend? How likely are you to do this and that?
Yeah.
And some companies, I won't mention their names, but those are very common. You'll see those on websites, and a lot
Mhm.
of times you try to answer them all 100, and then by the time you get down to the bottom and click submit, it says, oh, you missed one, and you have to just go back, and people get frustrated, they leave.
Yeah.
So the idea is to capture that value while not impacting the experience on the site. And those types of surveys typically get very low response rates, meaning you're just making decisions based on like 10 to 100 different respondents per month versus 10,000. And that kind of scale that you get from it gives you a lot of representativeness in the sample, as well as a lot of ways that you can slice that intent data and audience data by, you were looking for pricing information. What percent of those people actually saw the pricing page?
Right.
And that gives you the validation that my site is working or it's not.
Yeah. All right. So you went from social media data to doing this kind of work. And then
Mhm.
after that, you said you moved on to more of like Google Analytics, just general analysis of all the click stream data.
Yeah, essentially like an SME and an account manager in one,
Yeah.
where we had multiple lines of business servicing a client, and they said, "Yeah, we need analytics to be accurate for our paid media to prove the value of what it's driving to the site. For our
Yeah.
organic traffic that's coming to the site, we want to be able to accurately measure that." So I helped with things all the way from like closed loop implementations that are very complex, where you're
Mhm.
trying to integrate your front end web data with back end transactional data or lead data. So that's a very complex one, but as simple as well as like just tracking the page views, tracking the clicks.
Mm.
So anything in between attribution models, exporting data into databases and utilizing that are all things that were within scope for me for the different clients that I serviced.
Okay. And then that led you kind of in this general services model where you could be working in all kinds of different areas. You said after that you moved on a little bit further into doing work that's more focused. Did you say it was more focused on like just general site improvement and general uh
Yeah. So the
UX
next place I
design?
went after that was I went client side. One of my clients hired me directly to do the same thing, as well as some of that back end lead generation analysis.
Yeah.
Um, so, uh, so yeah, I pretty much just like ran all of the website analytics for that company for a period. We had 7 different sites, all built on different platforms, like Marketo. I forget the name of the CMS that I was working on before, but as well as custom React sites um, and other similar JS frameworks.
Yeah, like single page web apps that are like a lot
Yeah,
more complicated. Yeah. No,
yeah,
I
things
get
that
that.
designers built that ultimately didn't get any traffic, but we still wanted to track it. So, like, ultimately, some of them were strategically tough to say, like, oh, what's the value of this? Why did we build it? Um, yeah.
So this is a very interesting part here in your career. So you went from being completely on a services side, being completely
Mhm.
external to completely internal. Was there
Yeah.
like culture shock there? Was there like
Yeah.
how different is it for people like listening that maybe are on the agency side, like, or people that maybe are, that have always worked within a company? Like, how would you, describe that experience?
Yeah. It's a good question. It was pretty different, I would say, and it's even changed to the different client side companies that I've worked for.
Okay.
But I'll start with the agency, right? Like moving into an agency role, I had already been consulting, doing the survey stuff, so I was pretty comfortable with doing scopes of work and deciding like
Yeah.
these are the analyses we can do based on what your company does, and it had to be very specific to we know your company, you should pick us to work with you, right? And
Yeah.
we are pitching and we're giving pricing for what we think we can do, and we're positioning ourselves as experts, right? And
Yeah.
ultimately we are experts in the tools that we're doing and the like the methods that we use to track. But ultimately, it comes down to an agency model where it's like they hired me to do a scope of work as a part of a larger set of channels that we are selling, like paid SEO and analytics.
Right.
Um, so ultimately, it was all about keeping in scope. You were working hourly, tracking your hours, and saying, okay, you needed, you know, a diagnostic to know like is your tracking working. So we did that and it's deliverable, it's done.
Right.
And then you walk them through it and then they say great, when can we do this? And it's like, well, depending on how detailed you want to get, it can take some time. Some of it can be done automatically. And there's always that reset period of like, okay, this was the before and now we're tracking the after. um,
Mhm.
and so just generally teaching the client to understand what it means, how to interpret it, and how to use that to their boss to say, okay, the web traffic I'm driving is valuable and we are improving over time. So I'm essentially just assisting someone else in their job of proving that their web activities are driving value to the bottom line.
So that's on the agency side of
That's on the agency side. And there's a lot of focus on driving more value for the client to essentially lead to another contract. So
right.
it's very focused on transaction, very focused on being seen as an expert.
Now, on the when you go in-house, and this is interesting because you had some experience with this client before, like you'd
Mhm.
actually seen them kind of from the agency side. So now you are in-house. You've seen their
Yeah.
business from two different sides of it.
Yeah.
What was it like being on the inside?
Yeah. It was very different. I guess the context is when I got hired to the client side, I became the client and we retained that vendor, right?
Yeah.
So I worked with people I knew. I knew how they price. I knew how they work, and I
Mhm.
knew what I wanted right from that work. I essentially just wanted more technical resources to implement because what I found was investment in web analytics people and resources is usually pretty low. It's not the primary data source. This company I went to was very focused on Salesforce leads, and it was not focused.
Sure.
There was no goal for traffic, for conversion rate, for web. So ultimately, the goal was to connect those two data sources and to prove the value of different web activities that we were doing, like testing and
Mhm.
um, just like tracking new websites, making sure we had 100% uptime as much as possible, um, to make sure we had the data we needed to answer any questions we had. Um, there was also a focus. We were starting a new e-commerce side of the business. So essentially, let's make money while we sleep. Um,
Yeah.
and that was a big focus. And it was all Salesforce automation oriented. So that's when I first got exposure to a lot of this, like Salesforce data,
Yeah.
and realizing like some companies operate on that model. Like it's all about the leads and they don't care about where it came from aside from the last click. And we all know that it's
Yeah.
more complicated than that. There's multiple touches, there's multiple parties involved. And if you can't tie all those together and essentially prove the value of all those initiatives, some initiatives that are really valuable that are driving conversion are going to be overlooked and shut down. And ultimately, what you're left with was a bunch of channels that are good at driving that last click to conversion. And you're going to
Right.
get rid of all your upper funnel stuff around awareness, brand lift, all that stuff.
Yeah. So it's interesting, as you're going through that, you when you were on the other side, you didn't have access to very much of the Salesforce data before, right? At all.
That's
But it
not
would
at
have been
all.
helpful because if you
Yeah.
knew that that's actually how they're keeping score of everything,
Right. Yeah.
right? And you're just sitting there on
Exactly.
your side being like, okay, you have no idea like what the outcomes are.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, now that you're inside and you see them doing this, but you kind of know how the agency is thinking about it, how they have to plan it to actually
Mhm.
get you those leads in the first place, to actually get people into that Salesforce funnel. Like,
Yeah.
I guess, were you able to sort of advocate like some more knowledge internally from their side? Like, how do you navigate that situation? Because you've got two people that are looking at the world kind of different ways, right?
Yeah.
Like a sales force, sales like lead nurturing world, you know?
Mhm.
And you've got the like, how do I get you the leads? How do I use all the channels in concert to get to and orchestrate them to get you the
Yeah.
most? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts there, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, now that I've worked at two different client side companies with agencies that I work with, I find that those vendors are usually playing in a disadvantage, right? They don't have access to all the systems. They don't have access to all the tools. They have some context, but they're not a part of a lot of the internal discussions.
Right.
Um, so I think the biggest thing from the vendor side is like find your stakeholders that are going to root for you
Mhm.
and make sure like vendors just want to do the best work so that they can secure more and more work, right? And if they don't have the information they need to be successful, ultimately they're going to fail. And I go on a limb here and say that
Mm.
ultimately, if you have an agency under you and your client side and
Yeah.
you're not giving them all the information you have, you're also ultimately like shooting them in the foot because they don't have what they need to be successful. And I found recently I was like in a learning session in my current company, and they were called brand riz sessions, and they have different topics of people coming in, and one of them was like working with agencies,
Wait,
and
what was he called again?
it was called brand riz. So essentially, how do you represent the company to our vendors, and
Yeah.
how to like, yeah, there's all sorts of catchy names and cool project names that they like to make. But it essentially said that, you know, if you're client side and you're working with a vendor,
Yeah.
a lot of times the more detail you give them, the better results you'll get.
Yeah.
And I've tried to implement that since, and I found the more context that you give them, the better results you'll get. And a lot of times, there are people on those teams that are more junior that may not have the chops to really answer the questions you're asking.
Mhm.
But ultimately, as an organization, it's their job to kind of align behind that idea and say, okay, if the ultimate goal is to drive closed won opportunities, where are those happening and how can we get more? And it helps them figure out, okay, who do we need to talk to get that information, even if we don't have access to that tool?
Right.
Um, and ultimately, that gives you staying power. If you have advocates internally that have clout in the company, they're going to continue to give you that visibility you need to keep that contract.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really interesting. I guess like being oftentimes on the service provider side, I always feel like it's important for us to be invested in the careers of the people we're working. Like
Yeah,
that's always been something that I've seen as probably more important than anything is to contextualize. Because sometimes on our side, we'll get a request, but we don't
mhm,
understand the context of the request.
yeah,
We have a
exactly.
million ideas about how to actually solve the problem behind the problem, but
Yeah,
we have to ask questions. So I feel like more and more, it's like, all right, where's the company, where's your team headed? Where's the company headed? Where's the program headed that we're helping you with? And then okay, how do we make sure that we're giving you the right information to move forward? And ideally,
Yeah.
what I'd rather be on our side is to be in the position where we're helping the people that we're working with look good to their team and their management, rather than the people that we're working with feel like they have to protect the company from wasting
Amen.
much with us. I want to
Yeah.
make sure that
Yeah.
that they see us, that we're positioning ourselves to be an asset. But I don't know, is that as you're on the client side now, and you're like looking with the different people that you might be working with externally, do you work with anybody externally right now?
Yeah. I have a team. I work with Accenture. So
That's
um,
good.
large team that works for us, doing lots of different activities. And sometimes it's tough to know everything that they're working on. Right.
Oh
And,
yeah.
um, you know, I think one thing that I've noticed is they're also sometimes unaware of the politics that are involved
Right.
internally. When I was in consulting, I realized that one of our main stakeholders was using our contract to essentially prove his point. Um, so when we went to present our results in front of the whole team, uh, really large company, telecommunications, um, we were giving a presentation, we were talking, and all of a sudden he slams his fist on the conference room table and says, "Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell everyone." And it was essentially like, you know, he was finally vindicated of his point of view, and he's like, "Look at this data; it's telling you opposite of what all of you think." And I realized then that like a lot of what being a data provider is also just settling debates internally and trying
Yeah.
to stay neutral in that and say, just this is what the data says. I'm just the messenger. And you know, if you have follow-up questions, we can do additional analysis, and just being helpful in resolving those disputes, because ultimately that can lead to lots of gridlock in a company.
Right. Okay. All right. No, that it's interesting. So is that kind of the dynamic that you're at now? Do you kind of count on sometimes the third parties that you work with to help you in cases like that, where you might need, where like maybe having an external point of view would kind of help strengthen up, a case that you're trying to work on or make, or even
Yeah, yes
possibly
and
they could
no.
counter it. Maybe they could test it, maybe they could do the opposite. You could have a point of view. You could ask them to do some analysis and you find out,
Yeah.
all right, before I even bring it to the rest of my team, I kind of know what I'm dealing with here.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a balance of just not putting all your eggs in one basket and still being open to criticism all the time. I think, whether you're client side or vendor side, you just have to keep you have to have short toes. You don't want to take it personally if you're wrong. And I think that speaks a lot to the culture of your company and the culture of your client. If you're encouraged to just provide the data in as accurate of a picture as you can. Um, and yeah, like to answer your question on vendors, they do provide, some of them provide like the work. They don't necessarily provide their perspective on what they think it should be.
Um,
And then so we have like 20 agencies working for us, and some of
mhm.
them are more consultative in nature, where they're like helping us say, what are your other clients doing in this area? Like, how do they measure web? How do they solve these problems of
Yeah.
attribution? And others are typically tactical, right? They're just doing something as a stopgap for a shortage of internal employees that can do that. And they have certain weaknesses. They don't have access to certain systems. They work in different time zones. They have less context over time. So each agency provides their own strengths, depending on what their specialties are. And I think properly utilizing them is some of the puzzle that you have to put together of, okay, they're really good at this, they're not really good at that.
Right.
And it may be a little brutal to be honest about that openly, but like it also just it helps everyone like level up in a way that it's beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's to create a win-win situation. I mean, ultimately, right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Because ultimately, if I give them something and they come back with the wrong answer or the data is inaccurate, it's not just their fault. It also might be my fault for not explaining exactly what I was thinking of or what the business reason was for the request,
Mhm.
and who might be involved in that decision and what it could mean for that company.
This podcast is powered by Braindew, a digital marketing agency that not only provides a diverse mix of digital services, but offers guidance, experience, and true partnership to bring your business to the next level. This episode is about analytics, but we also offer expertise in data, paid media, development, paid search, and design, just to name a few. We've worked with businesses on every level, from local operations to Fortune 500 companies across a variety of industries. We have experts to strategize and execute your digital marketing needs, no matter what step in the process you're at. We're there for you. From wireframes to paid campaigns. Braindew, experts in everything digital. Please reach out today to learn more about how we can help your business grow.
Okay. So wanted to talk through kind of some current trends that are happening right now and see, and I'd like to get some perspective from you now that you're at as you mentioned, a big company, 20 agencies or different
Sure.
people you're kind of that you might work with on a pretty regular basis. And obviously all of the internal politics that has to go with different titles and roles and levels of responsibility throughout an organization. I'm curious right now, are there certain you know, ways that you are democratizing data or that you are sharing your learnings or kind of like recording your insights? Are there certain techniques that that companies are starting to do now to kind of get better consensus and alignment?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think people historically, before the advent of like AI and um, like automated systems, people typically transferred information on calls, right? And
Like,
their way of evangelizing their point of view was to call giant meetings and have everyone listen to them talk, just to get alignment. And I think, especially in web analytics, I've noticed that even client side, the number of FTEs or full time employees that are actually working on that is pretty low. So there's no way that one or two or three different web experts can talk to everybody in the company and kind of show them what to do or tell them what the data is saying. So one way that we do that would be with Tableau dashboards that everyone has access to, that are easily accessible and easily digestible. And that's where kind of data visualization is so important, because even if you do a good job with visualization, somebody's going to interpret it wrong. And ultimately it's a battle of education,
uh-huh.
uh, all while you're trying to battle for innovation and growth, right? And um, I think one thing that can really help democratize that is AI chatbots. We've been building those for different data sources for testing results, like, hey, what happened with this test? Or what are our recent tests that happened? And being able to sum that up easily, I think is a good thing. Now, AI chatbots are still pretty young, I'd say, in their infancy. So there are some drawbacks to that, which is incorrectly spewing out data that is not final. So
Hmm.
making sure that's clean and uh, just monitoring the kind of things that come out. Like a lot of times when I try to use AI at work, it gives me the wrong answer, even if it's built on internal data.
Yeah.
Um, so there's some skepticism I like to keep about that, but in general, that's sometimes what you have to revert to when you don't have enough resources to talk to all 20,000 employees, you know?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people. I'm curious. I mean, you brought it up, AI and chatbots. Okay. So for other enterprises out there, what's really the point of entry for them to do something like this, to get chatbots? I mean, I feel like a lot of people, obviously Windows comes with, Copilot. A
Okay.
lot of people might have, business licenses for like a premium version of a chat GPT or maybe the uh Google one. I'm drawing a blank right now.
Demo.
Yeah,
Okay.
Gemini, or obviously a few other ones, Llama and so on. So
Mhm.
I'm just curious right now, kind of like, how do people get into web analytics? Okay, let's just say that someone was in a similar role in another company. They're on that under too small team, web analytics team. They want to get some chatbots going. Do you have any advice on kind of how they spearhead that program?
Yeah, I mean, at my company is kind of a big focus, right?
Mhm.
So Martech, marketing technology, that team is essentially responsible for putting all that together and making it
Sure.
available to everybody. So I think if you don't have that, I think that's where you'd have to start is get Martech on board with essentially augmenting the work that employees do with use of AI. Um, and that's just kind of been built into my company since the beginning.
Mhm.
Everyone, we've got access to several AI chatbots, and I use them for different reasons, right? And some of them are better than others. Um, and yeah, essentially, training a chatbot you can do yourself at the company. So I think the one that we built most recently was on Glean.
Okay.
Um,
Great. All
I'm
right.
I'm thinking that I forget all the names,
Recommend
but
them?
anyway, yeah,
Would you
you
recommend?
essentially yeah, I think it works pretty well. Like you upload a bunch of files to a folder
Okay.
with the things you wanted to pull from, and you give it some prompts like, "This is what we're looking for you to provide. Um, this is how we want it provided. Any other points you have that you want to build it on, um, you build it." And then what we do is we point it to a bunch of internal team members in the same organization and say, "Hey, we're testing out this AI. See if
Mhm.
we can get useful results out of this." So if people have questions, they can just go to this link and ask them rather than taking up our time asking questions that may or may not be valid questions. Who knows? So so yeah, I mean, building them, I'd say it's still pretty early on. I wouldn't say we've really reduced our overall workload by using them yet, but it is in the works. I think prior to that, we were really relying on Tableau dashboards
Like
to
me.
kind of break down the overall results of things. Um, and obviously, there's data integration issues with having all the right data in the right place to do that at scale. So,
Mhm.
um, so yeah, self-service dashboards is really where we've gotten the most bang for our buck when we're an understaffed team.
I I get it. I'm interested in kind of your thoughts. So if you could jump a couple of years from now, do you think
Uh,
all the companies are going to be using like chatbots in a similar way? Like what do you imagine, is going to be normal in enterprise companies?
yeah. Well, I think by that time, a lot of us will have ridden all the bumps that AI is going through with like just having wrong numbers. Like they're doing math and it just like doesn't math.
Yep.
Um, I think that's the biggest thing that people are skeptical of when they use it. A lot of people put in something and they want a certain thing, and it outputs like 80% of what you actually wanted.
Mm,
Meaning, if it was a math calculation, like it's totally worthless at this point. But in 10 years, um, it should be a lot smarter. It should take over the portions of our jobs that are menial and tedious. Um,
mm.
and we'll just spend more time doing the strategic things, the things that, humans are good at deciding things and putting things into context, whereas AI is just good at predicting stuff in a very limited scope at this point. But yeah, I can see it going into a lot more of what we do and hopefully centralize a little bit because right nowadays like everything's got a chatbot in it or AI feature, and they're not always like fully baked yet. I think we're still trying to figure out that solution of how can it help uh, just everyday workers do their job better. So
No, I get it. I get it. I'm I mean, do you think it's going to replace like the dashboard development that you're currently doing, or do you think they're still going to kind of sit side by side?
I think they'll still sit by side by side. new technology gives you new capabilities, but it doesn't necessarily fully replace fully custom things, especially when it comes to important decisions around money, right? Like, the company is going down, and it's going down because we're over reliant on AI. Like,
Yeah.
people are going to let that happen. But um, if it enables huge growth and can be accurate, like, it could replace some pieces of that, I think. But um, yeah, no, I don't think it'll replace that anytime soon necessarily.
Okay. All right. Um, hmm. Do you think that people can use AI, like, as helpful for people creating dashboards or for creating different visualizations? Do you find it useful? Because I know that we've had cases where we've used, different LLMs and things to help us, you know, kind of approach problems or look for different ways on how to, you know, almost for guidance on how to begin the data exploration or the analysis process. Do you have that workflow on your side as well?
When it comes to building data sets or dashboards,
Mhm.
um, it's not that useful. It'll help me like work through some complicated like SQL or Python problems of like, why is this erroring out, or how could I do this? But
Right.
I may not know how to do a certain problem, and it can help me kind of ideate on that. But when it comes to building a dashboard, a lot of times it's not super helpful yet. Um, and if it has access to the data, a lot of times it doesn't interpret it right either in a way that is reusable.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know if that answers your
I
question.
don't know. No, it's all good. No, I've been thinking more along the lines of like, sometimes it's like creating Figma files and kind of like laying out what would the perfect view be if I'm sitting in this role? What number should I be looking at or highlighting every day? What's the number in the upper left hand?
Yeah,
Or, what kinds of chart ideas would be the right way to visualize this if I want to think about things over time or if I want to think about things as comparisons. And I found it
okay.
to recommend, use a bullet chart or use whatever the different kinds of visualizations are. I found it's been helpful for kind of, all right, more of like a UX focused planning piece because it's not like we have a giant data set like we do with the websites to go and figure
Yeah,
out how people are using the dashboard. And I'm always thinking about the dashboard as part of like a program. And I
yeah,
give you the right view and the right perspective at the right time so that it just feels like,
yeah.
get it. I have you get what's going on with that particular website you're at. But yeah, so I've been playing around with that and I found it to be pretty useful. It's
Nice.
definitely made me rethink, you know, just doing scorecards at the top and maybe like a single line graph and a table. It's
Yeah,
made me rethink a lot of that and come up with like alternative ways to approach the problem of just giving you like the right information, the right grain at the right time. Um,
yeah. No, 100%. I think the other thing that I struggle with is,
mhm.
once you've built a dashboard, reminding people that it exists and that it does answer those questions already. Because people start, at the company all the time, and they haven't seen all the announcement emails that you did like a year ago about a dashboard that you built.
I
And, you know,
love that point because I run into that issue all the time. You work so hard to
yeah,
build something and you wonder if it ever gets used. And I think
mhm,
sometimes on the vendor side, like it's hard for us to insert ourselves in the program. Like, is
yeah,
it appropriate for us to say, you know what? And in 2 months, we're going to have a meeting with all of you that use this dashboard. We're going to talk about what did you use and what didn't you use. Which
yeah,
of these charts did no one use for anything over the course of the past 2 months?
yeah,
What did you look at this dashboard and then decided to jump right into self-service directly in the interface to go look up yourself that we could have
yeah,
put in the dashboard had we had that conversation?
yeah.
And I feel like there's this part, I get my philosophy now is kind of like program versus product. It's like I
Mhm,
could build it as a product or as a project, but I'm trying to think of the life cycle of the product as a program and saying, I'm going to build a dashboard for these folks. I want to
Mhm.
use it on a regular basis. But I also want to make sure it's still relevant to them 6 months and a year from now. And someone needs to go
Yeah.
check that it's still working correctly.
Mhm.
Anything happen with the data source. So I've been
Yeah.
doing that. Now, I don't know if that's helpful to you, but I have a list of every supported dashboard that we have in an
Mhm.
area that I keep track of. And then we're trying to come up with a maintenance schedule on what it looks like to make sure that everything's 100%. And then there's periodic check ins, like on the right cadence, more
Yeah.
frequently early on until it's like, no, we can't come up with a better way to do this. This is
Yeah.
it.
Exactly.
Love it. It's exactly what we could not imagine a better version. And then
Mhm.
keeping it alive for making sure the business is still headed in the direction that it stays relevant.
Yeah, for sure. I think being client side,
And
I don't know of many dashboards that vendors have built that people use a lot. Um,
yeah,
a lot of the dashboards that we have are maintained by certain teams for certain reports for different organizations, and I think you know having those people internally that value that information, they will be your super user that's visiting it every day,
yeah.
and as long as they're happy, if anyone points a question at them that's related to that dashboard, they will then send that to that person. And there is some, halo effect of enabling certain key stakeholders with that information because then they can also evangelize the work you've done, right? Because you
Oh,
can
yeah.
build it. No one's necessarily going to come except that one guy that loves that data and uses it all the time to essentially prove his point.
Right.
Um, so yeah,
No, that's helpful. That's helpful. Like I said, my whole thing is I'm always trying to look into it and make sure that we're building things that are useful. Also,
yeah,
by having that inventory view, I can try to see what dashboards are almost redundant or like we covered this topic better over there. Like
yeah,
it's also another way to kind of review that. And even when new people join a role, like I try to think about should they be onboarded? Do they want us to take care of that? Are they going to do it internally? Like who's going to
yeah,
make sure that new person that replaced that person in that role is using the same dashboards?
yeah. I mean, earlier you asked me about what the future of AI could look like, and
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever read any of the 538 stuff, but they have a lot of like those interactive visuals on their blog posts, right? And especially for onboarding, if those dashboards could be integrated with AI generated analysis and framing that says like, okay, these are the charts that we typically look at, and these are the recent trends that we've seen, and this is the context of the business, um, in a way that's readable by a human, right? Like just like they're reading an internal blog post that says, lately in the last quarter, this product has dropped down, this one has stepped up. Um, these data sources will tell you that this is changing and the market is changing. Imagine if all those dashboards you work so hard on were being utilized by AI and then explained by AI in a way that is in the context of the business, which can be shared with new employees, vendors, and leaders, right? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the problem is giving a digestible, easy to understand way for people to get that information. And most people, I'd say, are not savvy enough to be able to say, "Oh, like ask the question like that's statistically different number than this one, and what does that mean to me?" Like that takes some data experience. That takes lots of like organizational pressure to essentially learn data and know how to interpret it properly. So yeah,
Yeah. I totally get it. So that brings me up to like one of the last topics I want to cover because I know that it affects all of us, especially in clickstream data or whenever we're talking about usage behavior data,
mhm,
privacy. And uh,
yes,
how we've got a lot of different pieces in play here that people can block or restrict, a lot of the collection of that data. And so we're dealing with samples, we're dealing with bias, we've also got bots and other things like non-human actors on our applications. So I just wanted to kind of get your sense on like, how do you see companies, larger enterprises tackling that, from your experience, or what would you imagine is going to be the direction that, how does this affect, I guess, analysis, interpretation, and that kind of thing?
Oh man, do you have another hour?
I know.
uh, I feel like I don't know. Big companies, they have teams for each thing:
Yep.
privacy team, legal team, and a
No,
martech team that follows the direction of legal.
well, they-
Um, and like, if your company's culture is focused around protecting the data of their customers, which most are, to varying degrees of actually achieving that. Um, yeah, they struggle with making sure it's all compliant, and constant review of that is really important. But on the flip side, like, you may be really good at doing all of that, but on the flip side, then it casts some doubt on the validity of your data, because you said it is a sample, right? And I think, especially for the data illiterate, even if they're, maybe a 5 out of 10 on the data literacy scale, like, they may not understand how to contextualize what actual numbers are and what sampled numbers are and how to relate them, right? And
right,
if
right,
they're
right.
if they're trending in a good way, they're like, okay, but what's the total? And they might be like, oh, we got 100 out of 100, visitors to the website, and then they're like, oh, but sorry, let me back up. We might get like 100 conversions on the website, right? And then we look at the backend data, and we've actually got 120. And then they're like, well, I don't know if I can trust the front end data because it's not everything. And I'm like, yeah, and that's the nature of technology that we live in, right? It's not, people have their right to be like, I don't want you to track me. Um, so I think there's two sides of that, right? Like, trust on the consumer side that we are going to use your data responsibly, and on the other side, it's like there's a lot of skepticism from, um, especially like finance teams that are like all about like adding everything up to 100%, whereas
Right.
marketing tends to be more like, well, we see trends going in the positive direction, we can track a certain amount of lift we're seeing. When we try to get to that dollar amount, it's not going to be exact, and things change so quickly that we can't just say one number and have that number become reality. Um, so I think there's a decent amount of misunderstanding around what is the value of web analytics data, what is the value of web when it relates to driving bottom of funnel business.
Mhm. I get it. I get it. I'm
Yeah.
sure AI will help us with that in the future. Some of that interpretation could be like, what this really corresponds with. Here's the three asterisks in the bias in this data.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
kind of
Exactly.
what you should be taken away. I'm curious. We'll get there.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, humans have a limited amount of attention span and only so much information they can consume at once. And some people will take completely different things out of the same data provided by AI. So ultimately, if we remove some human aspects of that, you could become more efficient, but then it turns into a black box very, very quickly if you lean more on AI than you do on people.
Yes. All right. This is. I think this is helpful. I think it's a good place to. It's a good place for us to end here. We've
Awesome.
covered a lot. We've gone the full gamut. Um, and I appreciate you coming on to talk with us.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Ryan, this has been fantastic. Kind of, if we can, let's go over, one final thought. Do you have any advice for people in the industry who might be in your position or maybe a bit earlier in their career?
Yeah. Here's what I'll say. Over the course of my career, I've worked with lots of different companies with lots of different problems, and some of them seem eternal, right? You feel like we're never going to overcome the opinion of this boss. Like, he's just stuck in his way. He wants to go that way, and we cannot turn him the other way. Um, I'd say stick with it, right? Like, over time, people come and go, and politics change, and the macroeconomic climate changes. So ultimately, there may be opportunity out there for people to change their minds with changing in technology, with change in uh, just the tools you have at your disposal. And ultimately, for me, I found the most success comes from just having experience with different tools, having experience with different problems, and applying that to later in your career. And you may be struggling through certain problems like I can't connect this data, or I can't convince this stakeholder, or I can't sell more of what I'm supposed to be selling. Ultimately, all of that is temporary. And you might be hyper focused on that one thing, but eventually you'll have a new challenge. And just learning what you can from every area that you can is ultimately what will make you successful, because every new company comes new challenges, and those new companies don't hold any of your past mistakes against you. So, you know, it can be a really encouraging thing for someone who might be at a company that they're like, I can't get through. I can't get heard. I can't get this data to join together quite right. And they might be discouraged. So, yeah.
Excellent advice. Well, thank you for joining us once again. To our audience, thank you for spending time with us. You can learn more about BrainDo and our marketing services at our website, www.brain.do. If you would like to see more from us, consider subscribing or giving us a follow. And otherwise, we'll see you next time at the Roundtable.
The Roundtable.